Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. Today, we discuss product design, and specifically the difference between a product development process and a product development recipe. Jason Stoller, it is so good to have you join me here today in the Grody and Unprofessional studio to discuss our time together at Precision Planting and to discuss our time together developing products.
Well, hey, Justin, it's good to be with you and get the chance to chat a little bit. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. One place that I like to start off with guys like yourself in a very similar way to me. You started your career at a large, multinational, publicly traded Dow 30 organization with tens of thousands of engineers across lots of countries in the globe. And about a decade into your career, you decided, despite promotion, despite opportunity, despite great comp and ben, you decided to leave that company and go join a small startup in a cornfield. Talk to me about what went into that decision. What went into that transition?
So 7 to 8 years into your career in a large company, it's long enough that you really start to understand just how business is done, how engineering is done, how product development is done at the company that you work for. That's probably the window between 5 and 7 years, I think, where I started to think about what is our purpose? Had the opportunity to work in 3 different business units of that company. I got the chance to experience the research part of that business, the electronics business, the production electronic systems business, and a little bit of time in a 3rd business unit. Through that 7 years, got to experience some great relationships, some great early research projects, some projects that were really close to production. But through that, started to think about and get excited about doing it differently.
Okay.
The first couple of years into your career, you're just looking for stability and just to figure out things. And then at that point, you start to think about what excites you and what excites and motivates. For me, one of those aspects is delivering product that actually really delivers value to a farmer or a customer, delivering a product that you see the end result with a customer. In many cases, being an engineer in a large company, it's hard to see that. It's hard to get that chance.
Right.
Was really looking for more and was starting to seek that out.
I worked at the same company you did, and I was there for 10 years. And I remember thinking, I've been at this company for a decade, and I've never shaken the hand or been in the same room with a person that uses the product that I've been developing. I would see the product on the side of the highway. I would see it out in society, and there was an affiliation from a distance that I was part of that. But it didn't provide the same feelings of sitting across the table from someone who was the user of that product.
Right, totally. In a large company, most engineers think of their customer as the product group that you're delivering your result to. Success means that you got past a gate review, and that is now turned over to someone else that gets to take that and support that in the field and interact with the customer. Your chance to hear about that is through a long feedback loop that's pretty delayed.
Right.
Until you realize the difference to actually sit next to a farmer that you developed a solution for, and they are ecstatic about that. That sense of purpose is really clear.
There's adrenaline to sit right across from the customer. There's also anxiety that can come from sitting right across from the customer. They know your phone number. They're going to reach out. They're going to call when they have problems. That's not a reality in a large organization where there's no chance where they're going to let the engineer's phone number out to the customer.
Right, absolutely. In a small business that is agricultural focused, farmers are all around us. Many times that customer is our neighbor, or it's the guy that I go to church with. That becomes very real because it's tied into people that I interact with. It ties in my professional world with my personal world, and that's really meaningful.
Yeah. What would you say across your time at Precision Planting has been the most stressful to be in close proximity to the customer?
In early development, the first proof of concept that our team is engaging with farmers in, that's some of the most exciting or the funnest early glimpse into what it can do. Giving a customer, the first experience or the first taste, it's all excitement and there's a ton of forgiveness because it's pure benefit from their perspective. It's pure upside. It's a very different thing when you have a customer that has written a check to the company that I work for, and this solution is expected to work for their livelihood.
Yeah.
When I'm sitting next to them on their piece of equipment in the field and it's not working and their livelihood is at stake, it feels really stressful because now it's personal, right? Their personal livelihood and mine are colliding, and it's up to us together to figure out how do we get out of this and how do we turn it from a challenge to an opportunity.
Absolutely. So one of the roles that you and I spent a fair bit of our time at Precision Planting in is the role of product manager. Product manager has a definition that is as wide as the number of companies that use that title. Talk to me about what the role at Precision Planting of product manager was.
The title of product manager is entirely different at Precision Planting than if you were to Google that term and look at the job scope of what that job description would look like. Product manager at Precision Planting is really a combination of product and engineering leadership, as well as commercial aspects as well. If I were to break it up, it's probably 30% product leadership, 50% engineering leadership, and then 20% actual marketing and commercial strategic pricing. When we talk about product leadership, that's about making the right thing. The engineering leadership is about making the thing right. On the commercial side, it's how we communicate the value to the customer of this new widget, this invention that we've developed.
Mm-hmm. The product manager in a lot of ways was the air traffic controller of the project, both from its initial concepting, deciding whether or not the organization would do the project or invest in the project, and then saw the project from cradle all the way to the market, from product development side, from product launch, including some of the manufacturing engineering. You mentioned the value messaging behind it. That was the part that really attracted me to the role, was the breadth of experience, the breadth of interactions that it brought. In some ways, you touched every aspect of the project. You didn't do every aspect. You weren't directly responsible for the sales of it or for the marketing of it or for the product support of it, but you were a resource to help those organizations prepare for the launch as it was coming, and then navigate the launch as it continued to expand. I loved that role, that opportunity to really impact and influence every aspect of a product as it came into the marketplace.
Product manager, that role at Precision Planting that starts with the birth of the concept all the way through production. It's the elimination of handoffs. That's the key difference from a typical larger organization where, in many cases, a research organization. There's a technical center and there's research engineers that their responsibilities is really to deliver a proof of concept that results in a presentation or a pitch to a product group, of which then there's another handoff, right? And that handoff is where they potentially pick up a PowerPoint presentation of a proof of concept, and a product manager will be developing the specifications or the requirements of what a product should be, engaging with the marketing team to develop a set of requirements. Then there's handoff number 3, which is to the engineering organization.
Right.
And then there's another handoff into production where there's potentially a continuous product improvement team.
Yes.
That's focused on taking the issues of which they've had no design control in the past or weren't a part of that and work to resolve that. The approach that Precision Planting has and had of a single ownership, meaning a product manager, which is really product engineering and a little bit of commercial and marketing aspects, you blow away all those silos and those handoffs and ultimately create an incredibly efficient process, but also more importantly is just such a greater ownership when that responsibility goes all the way through the process.
Yeah, you get rid of the not invented here mindset. In my tenure at the large organization that we both came from, I spent 3 years in research, 3 years in development, and 3 years in a production support area. Like you highlighted, there's these massive handoffs that the process says it should happen. You get to gateway 1 or gateway 2, and it moves from this group to this group. You get from gateway 5 to gateway 6 of the NPI program, and it moves from this group to this group. It all conceptually makes a ton of sense as executives talk about it above the clouds. But in practice, there's borderline resentment between these groups in a number of situations where, well, they didn't solve this problem in research. They just kicked it down the road to us in development. Or the continuous improvement group says, well, they didn't solve this in NPI. They just kicked it down the can to us. As you highlight, each product manager was the owner of every phase of that. There was no one to blame but themselves. You skip over all of the getting over the hurdle that you've got handed a raw deal from upstream. But 2, the person wrestling with solving the emerging issue was there as the product was architected, was there as the product was pieced together. We saw that issues were solved so much more rapidly, candidly, when the person who made the mess saw the mess emerging. They knew the X, the Y, the Z that went into those decisions and could recalibrate or recalculate the approach to the market or the approach to the technology and get us moving forward in a much quicker time period.
Yes, absolutely. I'm playing the long game because I fully see that the early decisions that I make, I'll also have that responsibility to see those all the way through. It's not a matter of getting it to a solid stopping point where I can transition that to someone else.
Right.
It really drives inherently the right sort of decision making.
Yeah. Another component that we embedded into the architecture of the product management structure and the engineering structure was that a given product manager owned both projects that would come to market in the future as well as products that were in the market presently. A lot of large organizations, they separate new product development from current product improvement under the mindset that there's 2 different ways that you tackle those problems. There's 2 different ways that you think about those problems, 2 different ways that you calculate what you should do. We actually put those 2 in tension. So we would have a group of 5, 6, 7 engineers working with a product manager, and we actually wanted to put into tension, do we fix field issues that are emerging in current product? Do we add features to current product? Or do we spend our time developing a new product? All of those can be to the benefit of the customer. All of those can be to the benefit of the bottom line of the business. A lot of organizations are broken up of new product and current product, and there's a group that has the budget and a group that doesn't have the budget and a group that has the political capital and a group that doesn't have the political capital. We wanted to mix all that together and really run the calculus at a much more customer-centric level, which is what should we be working on as an engineering group to the benefit of the customer? Fixing a problem, adding a compatibility feature, or bringing a new product to market. That's an atypical approach as compared to other organizations, in my observation.
Yeah, and that tension creates a really healthy decision-making, and I say process. It's actually a recipe. I like to use the word recipe more than a process because in the end, a process is something that you're constrained to follow. A recipe is something that is really guiding you towards an outcome. And there's a lot of freedom to deviate from that to make it better. As I think about, as it applies to this, it's absolutely the tension between improving a current product and advancing a new mind-blowing invention is one that totally drives the right behavior. It also creates really well-rounded engineers.
Yes.
That are fully capable of making the decisions of what is best. Having that tension and be a part of the same team actually drives really well-rounded decision-making for the creators that are doing that.
Because as new products are being developed, the engineer that is deciding technological features, if that exact engineer has been the one wrestling with in-field issues of a previous product, that knowledge base is going to be built directly into the new project. For example, an engineer at Precision Planting, he developed 3 products in a row that needed sealed bearings in a ground engaging product. By the time we got to the 3rd product, which was about 5 years after the launch of the first product, he knew exactly which seal and exactly how to design that product to work because he had been the one both to do the validation of the first 2 products as well as the continuous improvement work of what environments did it struggle in, what geographies did it struggle in. To your point, the organization actually accelerates and becomes faster as each individual iterates and becomes better at designing their products. There's a number of phrases that we used across the history of precision planting, R&D specifically. One of the phrases is, we wanted to be the fastest to fail. I've shared that with other organizations, and other companies struggle with the thought of having a goal that is to fail. They struggle with saying that failure is their goal. I don't know that we were ever intimidated to have the word failure as our goal. What does fastest to failure mean to you as you think about product development at Precision Planting?
Fastest to fail is critical to the success of invention. It is so easy for an engineering team to get together and to whiteboard, to brainstorm, and to spend so much time working through that as a group in an office, only to find out the first time that solution is actually tried, there was an obvious flaw, and a simple change would address that and move on to that. And so really it comes back to fastest to fail is ultimately the fastest to succeed, because it's how many times do I fail and address that issue to the point of success.
Yes.
When we talk about fast to fail, right, it's not about failing into
wildly right.
into production. It's talking about shrinking the design cycle time, whether it be software design cycle or mechanical design, during that middle to late stage development, right before you're getting ready to launch. That's where all the issues come out, trying to force that failure that then ultimately is empirically, you're figuring out what is the requirement, where are the gaps, where is the stressors in why that system isn't going to work.
That's right.
In some cases, especially the more mechanical products, those iterations have happened within hours.
Do you have a couple examples that come to mind from your product developments?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a closing system example. The team got together, definitely spent some time right around a whiteboard, but within probably a few days, I don't remember exactly, there were prototypes running in the field. And over the next 2 months, probably 20 iterations later, what emerged was a really solid working proof of concept.
Yeah. So you talk about going from a whiteboard to the field with a prototype in a couple of days, and then over the course of a couple months, having 20 iterations. That means that as the engineers were at the whiteboard, they ran the brainstorming without the fear of having to get it right the first time. In large organizations with expensive iterative costs, you and I worked at companies where every iteration would cost $1 million, $1.5 million. You weren't allowed to brainstorm outside of the mind cloud that it has to work the first time. But when you have the cost of iteration being a few days and a few $1,000s, engineers are freed up to take risk. It opens up the universe of possibilities that engineers are willing to try when their leadership says, no, we can't iterate forever. Fastest to fail is not, let's celebrate 1,000 failures, but it is to say, we expect the first one is going to fail. We want to get to that failure so that we can iterate to the second and to the third and to the fourth, because we know the answer is somewhere in the 40th or 50th iteration. If it takes us a week per iteration, that's a year. If it takes us a day for every iteration, that's 2 months. As we thought about fastest to failure, it was that we wanted to remove the stigma of an engineer making a recommendation that didn't work. It allowed the engineer to take greater risk. And then architecturally, organizationally, we wanted to decrease the cost of every iteration, both in time and in true dollars, to be as low as possible. We brought in tools like CNC machining into the engineering. We had engineers that were welding their prototype parts. We had test fields right out behind the shop. Everything in the facility domain was built around equipping and enabling engineers to take risk without seeking approval. There wasn't a review board that had to go over every prototype that was done. It was go forth and make educated guesses and get closer and closer to the solution as rapidly as possible.
It totally comes down to the consequence of failure.
Yes.
If the consequence of failure is only that gives me opportunity to test a different solution that I hadn't thought of because I was locked in on only one path forward, then that's the opportunity, right? That consequence of failure is actually what is needed to get to the solution.
Yes.
And that's very different than if the consequence of failure is how am I going to perceive by my supervisor, or how am I going to perceive at the next gate review based on my failure. The excitement of being fast to fail is actually a true excitement because the consequence is success ultimately.
Yes.
In a much faster pace than the alternative.
I spent a decade at a large organization, and I bet I could clock 6 years of that decade that I worked on products that I knew were not destined for success. We used to call them ghost ships. We knew we were never going to make it back into harbor, but you can't say that out loud because there's political risk for you personally. Everybody in the organization knows that the project is going to fail. But you can't say that because the leadership either doesn't know yet or they don't believe it yet. They accuse the engineers of being selfish or being not creative or whatever. The other aspect that happens is all of our time had to be billed to a charge number. And so if your project stops getting funded, you might get laid off. And so you're even doubly incentivized to not raise your hand. We tried to flip the script where if an engineer was running a test on the 10th iteration, the 15th iteration, the 20th iteration, and he didn't believe it was going to work. He believed that we were not headed in the right direction. We wanted to incentivize that engineer to raise their hand and say, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z in this test. I don't think it's going to happen. There were a few products during our time together that we had iterated 20, 30, 40 times, and we were not coming in on a solution. Ultimately, the right thing to do was to divest after 2 years of working on a project.
Yeah, and with that example, actually, it's a divest for a period of time until the right unlock happens. We moved on to a totally different project, ultimately to revisit the value prop with a different team, with a different look. A year or two later, there was some real unlocks that came that were not even present or even possible those years before. So a pivot to stop a project might be a pause because there's greater opportunity elsewhere, or it might mean that it's just a period of time. So again, the consequence of failure, what is it? If the consequence of failure is success or pivot, that drives a really healthy culture.
Yes.
Where I'm unafraid.
One of the ways that we practically tried to also soften the blow of an engineer realizing that the project they were working on was not headed for success was to have a list of projects that weren't being worked on that people were really excited to get started on. We would broadcast these projects, not in a specific meeting, but we would let the organization know through the grapevine, man, the next 4 engineers that come available, they're going to work on this new emerging technology. In many ways, incentivize the engineer that if they found out they were on a ghost ship, they found out their project was not going to head to the market, they wanted to get off, not because they were afraid it wasn't going anywhere, but there was something exciting to go work on other than what they were working on. I think it's Warren Buffett that says the best investors make 2 good decisions. The day that you buy the stock and the day that you sell the stock. A lot of organizations are built around not wasting money in the pursuit of a product. And so they try to be more perfect in every little step. We only have finite dollars, so we're going to make perfect decisions and aligned decisions, and we can't have failure, and we're just going to make this clean run straight down. My observation is it's riddled with waste. That decision methodology is riddled with waste in human behavior and aligning the politics of the situation and waiting for meetings. Our approach was to really flip the script and say, go forth, iterate, tell us what you find out, and go as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah, and coupled with that is the authority rests with the creator, whether it be a purely mechanical product like a closing system or a really advanced software product, computer vision related product. If the authority rests with the creator, that's incredibly freeing, both to make the decision to pivot or to be tenacious at sticking it out.
Yeah.
So
as we think about portfolio management, at any given point, we would be working on 15 or so products that were headed to market with the anticipation that 5 of them would be found out to not have what it takes to get to the market. Now, at any given day, I couldn't tell you which of those 5 it would be. There would be maybe 2 or 3 that, they're probably going to struggle. We need to prove this. We need to prove this. So many organizations say, don't start anything until you know it can succeed. We took a very different approach, which was to say, don't continue anything once you know it won't succeed. Like any other organization, we had to do forecasting. We had to do demand planning. We had to do all of these business functions. We just had to find creative ways to hedge the reality that we were taking greater risk in R&D against what was communicated to the financial organizations and to the sales organization. We talk about iteration. I was reflecting on some of our experiences together, and I remember you and I, we were at a large global OEM that we've worked with in the past, and we were talking about one of these projects that we were tackling, that we were taking on. We were essentially designing a component that was going to be in the dirt right next to the seed. This is a design space that is sacred. Once a seed gets into the furrow, you don't touch it. You got to get it in the right place and you got to leave it there. Our goal was to actually put fertilizer extremely close to the seed, uncomfortably close to the seed, as many companies would view it. But the agronomic opportunity of the customer was huge if it could be figured out. And I remember you and I were in a conference room and we were pitching this concept to the OEM. And the answer that was said back is, we would never allow our engineers to attempt something like this. The risk is too high. The cost of iteration is too high. Even if we get to market, if there's an issue in the field, the cost of support is just too high. We would never tackle something like that. I just remember thinking, this speed of iteration, this freedom to fail, actually expands the universe of problems that we are willing to try to tackle versus organizations that either have to take personal or professional risk if they're going to recommend something that might not succeed.
when someone says that's too risky, almost always what that means is that could have unforeseen problems that you don't know now. But what is almost always missed is the risk of not developing that solution.
Yes.
In that example, not developing a solution to solve that problem of fertilizer placement, ultimately, there's a whole nother risk that says I actually have to start inventing to even understand how to solve the next problem.
Mm-hmm.
An organization that's built around protecting from potential failure ultimately locks up their ability to invent. In most cases, the risk of not doing it far outweighs the risk of actually doing it and potentially being partially wrong,
right,
and then reacting to that.
Right. In that project in particular, it was something like 40 iterations that we went through in about a 2-year period to get that product to market. And those 40 iterations, there are multiple generational changes. It wasn't just minor tweaks. There were times where we had to jump to a different architecture, physical architecture of the product. But in each instance, it was the understanding that if we can stick the landing, it will be a profitable product for the customer, first and foremost, but then also for the business in addition to that.
Yes. The other aspect I'm thinking about that project is that if we're trying to solve problems or design a solution that is only a universal solution that has to work everywhere, ultimately that limits our ability to invent and to provide a total suite of solutions that really benefits the total addressable market that's out there. Again, the risk of not solving that problem would have severely limited our ability to really provide a suite of solutions,
yes, across
all of the conditions that farmers face. If we had just taken the risk-adverse approach and said, hey, that's not going to work in every condition, So therefore, we have to go back to the drawing board and only provide solutions that
work everywhere.
That work everywhere.
Is exactly right. The other thing that we allowed ourselves through the production launch of the product was we allowed ourselves to constrain who and where and how many of a given product was sold early on. Most large organizations, the sales team would never allow for that. The chief executive would never allow for that. Engineers are forced to design a product that works everywhere, always, for everyone. That itself shrinks the universe of problems you can try to solve because there aren't mechanical or even software solutions in all corners of a marketplace as technologies are emerging. I remember multiple technologies that we worked on over the last decade where I would talk to an OEM or I would talk to a competitor and they would say, man, we would never be allowed to work on that problem because of, and then they would list this minor long tail scenario or this minor niche situation of sunflowers in the Ukraine, or they would list some random crop in some random country. We just were not constrained. We didn't limit ourselves in it has to work everywhere all the time. We worked very closely with the sales organization. We worked very closely with leadership to say, here's the 95% of the places it's going to work really well. Let's build that into dealer training. Let's build that into support. Let's build that into features so that it's placed and positioned well. Whereas most organizations, they say, if it doesn't solve every problem under the sun, don't work on it. It just allowed us to work in so many different places. And to your point, once you solve the first generation of problems, you're ahead of the game because you now get exposed to what are the second generation of customer issues that need to be resolved. You end up asking far more important questions and far more informed questions to the customer than someone who still hasn't wrestled with the first issue yet. One thing I want to ask you, this is something that you and I over the years always discussed and debated with each and every project. Invariably, there would be questions or risks on the agronomics. How much grain or how much profit does the customer get if this thing works? There would be technical questions, stress, strain, rust, force, software. And then there would be economic questions. Can we sell it profitably? The best product was the one that solved all three of those problems. It was technically sound, the customer made a ton of money, and the company made a ton of money. As you thought about iteration 1 of 40, 2 of 40, how did you prioritize or how did you discern which of those three to wrestle with most on the earlier phase of iteration?
That's a good question. As we would make the decision to tackle a new problem, a new space, it started with what space is the real opportunity to provide value to that farmer, which is a blend of the economics as well as the agronomy.
Yes.
Right. That fundamentally has to be present. If that's not present, no matter how good of an engineering solution you have, it's not going to work. It's not going to fly. So once that's been identified, then it's hardcore. Can we do it from a technical perspective? And can we do it cost effectively enough that it's viable? Then usually at some point maybe it's into the alpha, past the proof of concept, the teams really kind of pivot back to that. Is there really still the agronomic and economic value for the customer?
Yes.
Right. How solid is that? Was the thought process that we had a year ago or months ago still really valid now that the product concept looks like this? And in some cases, it's not. And so that's where another pivot happens, not because of the technical challenge, but just because the direction of the technical design really drove us to a totally different approach based on that.
Yes, that's right.
So it basically, it's all three.
But it cycles. Yeah. One of the unique aspects of the industry that we served, our products generally sit in a shed for about 40 weeks out of the year, and then generally are used 12, 16 hours a day sometimes for 5 or 6 weeks out of the year. In order to prove the agronomic, there was only 1 or 2 months in the year that you were going to get an entire year's worth of information. If it was a planting product, you planted it in April, and then you watched that planting event as the crop emerged, as the crop grew, as the crop came to harvest, and ultimately get one data point a year. What we saw is from about January to April, it was all about getting that agronomic information, because this was information you weren't going to be able to collect in the iterations in August and September. While getting the crop in the ground, you would learn a ton about its technical capability, about its performance capability. You would start wrestling with those things coming out of planting, in this example of a planting product. And then as the yield came back in the fall, you would reintroduce, what did we learn agronomically? How do we impact it? All the while keeping a tally of what's this thing going to cost, because what it costs for us to buy it and build it is going to affect what we're able to price it with. The other part that ties in here, because we were launching products so rapidly, I haven't done the math, but my guess is on average, engineers at Precision Planting R&D have launched 5 products each. They know what things cost. They know the supply base. Even in early iterations, they're making cost-centered trade-offs that large organizations aren't able to make for years in some instances, because, well, that's purchasing that does supplier development, and the engineer that picked the part didn't know the supplier issues or supplier relationships. You were never wrestling with just one of them, but it was cyclical of which one am I most pushing on right now to make sure that it deserves the next iteration. Because we always viewed the asset most precious was the engineer's time. Projects earned the right to be worked on by engineers. We didn't view it the other way. It was the project that was guilty until proven innocent, not the engineer that was guilty until proven innocent. And if iterations were happening where either the agronomics aren't showing up, or the technical side of it, the structural side of it isn't showing up, or the economic side of it isn't showing up where it can be sold profitably, that's where we would come together as a group and we would say, Pete and Sally and Steve are way too talented to be working on this project that's on its 25th iteration, and we have not bent the curve yet on this agronomic issue. Are we really going to commit these 3 talented people for another year to get from iteration 25 to 30 if we don't think we can solve this issue? It was always focused on the resource most precious, the individual working on the project, not getting this project to market. That flip, it made it so much easier for, it wasn't that it was joyful to stop a project, but it wasn't that the individual that was working on it felt that they were blamed for stopping a project. Another component, and you and I have touched on it a little bit, but I want to flesh it out a little bit more. We focused so much on speed of iteration. One of the phrases that we would use is we wanted to be 3 years faster from idea to market than other people in the industry. What are some of the things that you see at Precision Planting that are built into the building, built into the structure, built into the ethos, that are really to focus on removing the hundreds of approval meetings, the hundreds of alignment meetings, to cut ultimately 1,000 days out of a product development process?
Yeah, the start of a project that turns into an invention that turns into a product is as simple as a commitment to solve a problem in this space. And that's as far as it goes. The start of that project is the right engineer coupled with a product leader. There's no requirements document that's being developed. There's no budget assigned that has to meet approval. The right engineer coupled with the right leader have total freedom to spend what they need to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And to start to define that. That's the first one. The second one is, again, the access for that engineer to whatever they need to succeed. So whether that be machine shop access for prototype parts, if it's software, it's the same thing. It's how do I mock up the system to get to a viable concept that I can understand and start to validate. Total freedom to invent without a prescription. That's the early unlock. After that, it's about the iterations that we talked about. the freedom to iterate as quickly as the time that I have in the day. Once there's the aha of like, not only is this problem worthy of solving, and this is an amazing way to solve that works from an economics, from a cost structure and technically, then it's just how fast do we actually pull a team around that first one or two individuals.
Yeah.
Our goal as an R&D team is that we're winning as a team and not just one product that wins.
Yes.
So the ability to spin off some team members from other projects and other products really quickly, and the grace that's given between the product leads to actually do that unlocks months or sometimes years of the concept turning into a product.
You touch on a really important one there that I don't know that we've said explicitly, but man, it was so important. We would be working on 10 or 15 projects at a time, and we knew numerically that they weren't all going to make it to the finish line. And we knew as the spring was coming, they weren't all going to make it to the field. And we didn't know which ones they were and which ones they weren't. You said the phrase, we win as a team, we lose as a team, and that the project leads did not view themselves as in direct competition with one another. The important component was that as a group, we came together on a regular basis and we reviewed the projects because there were limited resources. Every organization has limited resources. We would come together as a group pulling for the totality of us, and we would say, hey, for me to get to the field this year, I need A, B, C, and D. And another product manager would say, I need A, C, F, and G. Okay, A and C are in conflict. Let's, as a group, sit down and discuss how much of A do we have, how much of C do we have, and can we distribute it in a way that both can make it to the field, or do we need to put all of our resources on A, either because it's closer to the finish line or because it needs to be solved for the company? I remember from my first year at Precision Planting, I was in one of those roles where I was given a charter to bring a product for testing to the field. And it's getting closer and it's getting closer, and I don't have the resources that I need. And we've got a few engineers, but we just can't get it going. I remember the tension building because I came from a large organization where there's no room for failure. Once it's on your goals, there's no room for, oh, there was an earthquake. Oh, there was a plane crash. Oh, there was an economic. It was on your goals last October. You better get it done or you're going to get a bad rating. And so the tension is building as we're getting closer and closer and closer, and I'm not getting the resources I need to succeed. I distinctly remember the event where the head of R&D at the time sits down with me in a one-on-one, and he says, it's the right thing for the business that you're not going to go to the field this coming spring. The resources that you need will be better used on these other projects that are already in the market and they already have sales, and we need to get these features locked in before spring. With the time you have between now and spring and the resources that we have available to you, what is the right thing to work on and what can you get done? I just remember walking out of that meeting as if a 1-ton weight had been lifted off my shoulders because I was no longer under the pressure of being held to something that I thought we could get done 12 months ago. I was now rooting for us as a team to get these important features done because we win as a team and we lose as a team. You highlight this important. There has to be an active prioritization process that is supplying resources to those that need the resources strategically to get the business moving forward. And in essence, relieving some of, hey, you're not going to get the resources. So with what we have left, what can we get done that positions us best for the following year? There's a both and aspect to it that is a huge part of everybody keeping their guns pointed downfield rather than, hey, this software resource that you're using is going to give me a bad rating at the end of the year if I don't get them. So I'm going to either coercively or directly try to pry this person away from you. It was a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And right along with that is like your identity as a product manager or even as an engineer is not defined by like, I am responsible only for solving planting problems or spraying problems or harvest problems, or this is exactly the job definition of what my identity or my success is tied to. At Precision Planting, it's our job to solve problems.
Yes.
And that might mean that I'm a part of this team to solve this problem at this point in time. But if there's a greater problem that needs being solved, I'm just as excited to join this other team.
Yes.
Because my value to the company is actually to be focused on solving the greatest problem.
That's right.
And that's totally different than if my value is tied to what my job description says.
Yeah.
Right. It's totally different.
So, Jason, I want to play the devil's advocate for a moment. Let's assume that there is a division manager or an engineering manager from a large global OEM listening to this conversation right here. And in the first 3/4 of the conversation, they've heard, we don't have budget reviews. Engineers are allowed to iterate, that stopping projects isn't a bad thing. Failure is fine. And in their mind, they're thinking, this is complete chaos. And engineers are perfectionists that will never stop working on a project. How did you ever get a product out? What would you say to someone that hears what we're saying and thinks that there's no possible way that this can work?
I'd be asking the exact same question, right? I'd be like, it must be the Wild West over there. The interesting thing about how development is done at Precision Planting is I come back to say there's recipes, there's not processes.
Yeah.
That's statement one. Statement two is there's a high level of trust, but there's absolutely checks and balances. Some of those checks and balances come from what we talked about earlier. The decision that I make if I'm an engineer, I will absolutely feel the impact of that, positive or negative, years down the road, because that ownership comes with me all the way through the process. But absolutely, there's gentle nudging from leadership. There is gentle nudging from peers. Sometimes peers are the best checks and balances.
That's right.
In terms of the real openness. There's just 100 little corrections that happen that isn't tied to a process and a date and a gate review. There is a recipe that's being followed, not to a T, because the authority to deviate, to those who don't know how to cook, right, you've got to follow a recipe to a T. But once you know and have had experience, then a recipe can provide some guidance, but gives a ton of flexibility to deviate to make something even better. That's how we've operated, coupled with a little bit of checks and balances. And so there's opportunity to make corrections. But again, the goal in product development is to have a recipe in place, which is very different than being a slave to a process.
Right. No, you touched it. There's many of those aspects. There's a couple that come to mind. First is the proximity to the customer. We talked about large organizations. The marketing organization is my customer, or product management is my customer, or the NPI project managers are my customer. Customer gets used in 1,000 different directions that is not the person paying actual money for the product. One aspect of Precision Planting is there was no engineer that was isolated from the customer. That doesn't mean every engineer's cell phone number was on blast, but in particular, serving agriculture in Central Illinois in a small organization, at least for me, there are customers sitting next to me at church. There are customers sitting next to me at basketball games in the middle school. And there's always a knowledge that they know who I am. They know what we're working on. They may own one, and they're going to ask me after the game, so how's it coming along? I'm still having trouble. One of the things that large organizations struggle with, and that's why they have process, and that's why they lead with the stick rather than the carrot, is because there's not a sense of urgency. When you shake hands with the customer, urgency is in spades. You have urgency everywhere. The other aspect is the proximity to the sales organization. We had a very close relationship with the sales organization. What features are selling? What features aren't selling? Why are features selling? What features should we add in order to sell more? The sales organization, they're making their living off of products being able to sell. And so again, creating an urgency inside of not just the leadership of the R&D organization, but the individual contributors of the R&D organization. Another aspect, I don't know that we have time to wrestle with it in this episode, maybe it's the second Jason Stoller episode, is we actually recruited uniquely for the R&D organization. We weren't looking for the lock, stock, and barrel engineer from large multinational process-centric organizations. We were looking for high accountability engineers. We were looking for high autonomy engineers. We were looking for high ownership engineers. We were looking for engineers that were intrinsically motivated. In general, these were engineers that had spent a few years at large organizations and had become frustrated with the kid gloves and the process limitations and the slow speed of everything. We ran an organization that, man, if you wanted to get something done, if you wanted to push the boundaries, if you wanted to see the handiwork of your work, the good side of it getting in the free market and the tough side of it getting into the free market, we just didn't have to drive urgency as much as we had to make sure that the urgency was focused in the right direction.
Yeah, you mentioned recruiting. It makes me think it can feel really safe to be one of a large team and to have a really defined job scope. In some ways, working for Precision Planning was not that. We both sat in on a lot of interviews and we were pretty upfront in terms of, hey, this is what it's like to be a part of Precision Planning. It's not going to feel safe in the way that you might have thought, but we were intentionally really wanting the individuals that has fire in their eyes, right? That's really looking to make a difference and isn't looking for safety as their primary goal from a job perspective. That doesn't mean that you're left out hanging on your own, but it does mean that a lot of responsibility is going to rest on you. And the limitation of your success is usually tied not by constraints that the organization imposes, but just by literally your aptitude to pull it off.
Yeah.
That can be scary for some and it can be thrilling for others.
Yeah. Both you and I have multiple occurrences of the experience of standing in front of 4,000 people and from our own mouth telling 4,000 people that something will be ready in time for spring. There is no greater urgency than I have experienced in my life than making sure that it works in time for spring after having told 4,000 people that it would work. Proximity to the free market drives focus, it drives clarity, and it drives urgency into the organization. Our role in leading the organization was as much to harness and prioritize that energy rather than having to create that energy, which is what most large organizations are trying to do through process, through rigor, through goals, through metrics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jason, it's so good to spend time with you. Thanks for coming by. It's been an awesome time working together. It's a chapter of my life that I will not soon forget. And I love getting to sit down, reminisce, but also share just how we thought about product development.
I appreciate it, Justin. It's been a really good chat, and the opportunity to really think differently about product development and be a part of that has been incredible. Very few have the opportunity to be a part of an organization that there's a total freedom to create and to solve problems. It's a recipe, not a process, and it's an amazing opportunity for individuals and leaders to be a part of that, and it's fun to talk about that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming by.
So, sure.
For those of you hoping to learn more about balancing productivity and chaos in product development, I can be reached via my email, justin@grody.io. If you happen to believe that fastest to fail is a naive and wasteful way of developing products, I would ask you, did your grandma's world-famous pineapple upside-down cake recipe come from the back of a Nestle Toll House box, or was it developed over time through low-cost iteration and proximity to the customer? Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.